Love it. All right. Well, again, thank you all for taking the time to join us here today. We're really excited and looking forward to the conversation, specifically on why spreadsheets will fail organizations in the new era of strategy. And ultimately, what sparked this conversation was the work that we've been doing here over the last few months with organizations, not only in helping to introduce AI into the way that they go about strategic planning and the execution of that strategy, but I think even more than that, helping to communicate within their organizations the gap that is being created between the traditional means by which organizations go about building their strategy and execution upon it, which oftentimes is done very manually, versus really leaning into and leveraging technology to help accelerate the way in which their strategic plan is having an impact across the entire organization. So to take on this topic of conversation, I not only wanted to join in on the fun because this is something that we hear so frequently from customers, prospects, other strategy leaders. I also wanted to bring in two other members of our team here at Elate, Nathan and Sara, who I'll let them introduce themselves here in a moment. But they live this not only in their work day to day here at Elate, specifically Nathan himself and how he views things, strategy and ops at Elate, but also Sara and the things that she's hearing and seeing from our work with customers. And so maybe with that, Nathan and Sara, Nathan, I'll let you go first. Quick intros before we dive in here today.
Yeah, sounds great. Hey, everyone. I'm Nathan. I lead strategy and operations here at Elate, which a lot of times means right in the middle of revenue, finance, product, all the above. Day to day, the reason I'm on this webinar right now is I am typically the person reconciling kind of our spreadsheets internally, tying that together with, the executive reports, the board story, talking through pipelines, how we keep things from drifting, 10 to 12 different ways by Q4, those types of things. So coming at this as a fellow operator, not just a theorist here, I personally spend, and I'll talk about this a little bit, a very unhealthy amount of time in spreadsheets still. The difference between kind of how we think about it is just not letting them run our strategy anymore. So a little bit about me, but Sara, pass it off to you.
Thank you, Nathan. Hi, Sara Brandstatter. I have the pleasure of leading our account management team here at Elate, which means I get to work really closely with some of our customers and hear their struggles and try to help resolve those through some of the solutions that we offer. I think something that everyone knows about me is I have a strong love-hate relationship with spreadsheets. I think early on in my career, I actually had this mug on my Christmas list that said, I love spreadsheets. And I really wanted that coffee mug. Come to now where I do everything I can to avoid having to report in another spreadsheet if possible. How do we avoid not putting this in a spreadsheet? So just kind of an evolution of that. I love, have a lot of passion around this topic and excited to chat about it today.
Wonderful. Well, as I've already touched on in here, Nathan and Sara alluded to where we want to start before we dive into the differences between running strategy out of a spreadsheet and a strategy execution platform is with this statement, so to speak, in today's agenda around the evolution of strategy, pros and cons of spreadsheets, role of spreadsheets themselves. What these agenda items are all anchored on is this belief that we are not anti-spreadsheet. What we're going to speak to is the role in which they play in a strategy itself, in the way we go about executing it, because we are not going to just try to eliminate spreadsheets entirely from organizations. The agenda calls that out. This is something where we want to give context to the when and the why for spreadsheets being incorporated into the way we think about strategic planning and also strategy execution, because spreadsheets themselves were not designed to host the entirety of our strategy itself. They weren't designed to optimize the way that we think in a more dynamic way about how do we accelerate into the areas of opportunity or the things that are working, or pivot away from and adjust when those initiatives themselves that we thought were the right bets are no longer the bets to be made. But we want to start with this. We are not anti-spreadsheet. We just simply want to give context to where spreadsheets tie in. And in doing so, also speak to where we are going directionally, I think, as a strategy and operations community, because it really does matter in how we communicate the differences between leveraging and leaning on spreadsheets too much in the optimization of our strategy versus understanding, again, where they plug into it. And so why this matters now more than ever is every organization that we speak to, that we're seeing, are being asked to do more with less. It's, hey, how do we go faster with less resources, with more ability to leverage technology, whether it's removing mundane tasks like assembling board reports or bringing together data from a variety of different sources into one unified view, or simply being able to prioritize the right things over inevitably everything that gets brought onto our plate. We are just seeing so many organizations being asked to go further with less resources. And that's coming not just from their leadership and management teams, it's coming from boards of directors, from shareholders who are looking at ways in which their organizations are optimizing how AI is being introduced within the organization itself. I don't think we go through a single conversation where organizations, specifically leadership teams, are not being asked to provide context on how are they tracking efficiency gains through their organization by introducing AI into every area: sales, marketing, engineering, product, manufacturing. All of this kind of also tying into this idea that for a lot of organizations, they do not need access to more data. They have so much data at their fingertips, so many different dashboards. However, they're really struggling to understand how to contextualize that data in a way where it's sifting through a lot of the noise to really surface the signals that need to be surfaced to our leadership team. So for us, the way that we think about this is, for organizations that are just using running their strategy out of spreadsheets, it's static. There's a very much reporting on yesterday's news aspect to an individual going in, providing an update to a spreadsheet that we'll talk about. But there's also the idea that when we are building AI into our strategic planning motion and how we track that strategy, we're now starting to gain exponentially learning off of past performance to help guide future direction, help guide future decisions themselves that are being put in place within the organization. So this chasm that we're seeing of folks that are just continuing to run things in a very static manual way, there's incremental gains. Yes, you're maybe getting more visibility, more alignment when it's in a spreadsheet and it's all being codified into a single view, but you're not necessarily getting a lot of the recommendations, best practices, guidance that AI can start to bring into the fold when that is something that's being incorporated into that planning process. So that all being said, we're going to go through some of the challenges and pitfalls that we see as it relates to continuing to leverage spreadsheets, and then also the best practices that we're seeing across our customers when it comes to starting to incorporate AI. So to press into that, kind of 3 pitfalls that we see when spreadsheets run an organization strategy. First and foremost is just multiple spreadsheets. And this is a probably very low hanging fruit item. But when multiple teams are tracking multiple different strategies across multiple different spreadsheets, and there's different versions of those strategies, it's inevitable that there's going to be a disconnect. It's inevitable that those spreadsheets are going to get lost in translation, that certain teams and areas of the organization will have access to certain information as opposed to others. Forbes recently just came out with an article sharing that 19% roughly of employees' time is spent tracking down updates to initiatives that impact their work. And that's tracking them down through spreadsheets, through email, through different data sources, BI tools. 1/5 of employees' time is just spent looking across the entirety of where all of this information typically lives. This is obviously just an incredible time suck for these individuals within these organizations themselves. Nathan, I know you mentioned this, the multiple spreadsheets aspect. This is something
I think one thing too, throw in the chat how many spreadsheets that you all have access to today. I'm just curious how many that is for each of you. I would imagine that it's quite a few. And I think it's just so interesting to think about the sprawl that happens there and the number of spreadsheets you're being asked to remember, to go back and reference, to compare, and to update can quickly become overwhelming. So
yeah, I see thousands. I see infinite. I'm not sure, Nathan, that's how many. Yeah. I'm not sure that's how many we have, but I think this is something you'll speak to here in a little bit as well.
Definitely close. Yeah. Yeah, getting there.
Awesome. And so when we take that, the next layer of this is then being able to look at a spreadsheet, which is static, it's manually being tracked. The context that's provided is at a single point in time. It is not dynamic. It is not something that's living and breathing, connected to different data sources where outcomes are being tracked in a proactive way to give us line of sight and visibility into what's working and what's not. And so when we are looking at something that the second it's updated, it's immediately out of date, that now limits our ability to not just take action, but to understand how to take that action itself, because it's living in that siloed update. That's where, again, a lot of the extra time is spent by employees seeing something is at risk or behind in a spreadsheet, or trying to track down when was the last time this was even updated. That all of a sudden now we're starting to see the nature of which a spreadsheet, while it can simplify, it can bring things together and kind of give us a starting point, it starts to compound in the amount of time that's being used or spent trying to keep that updated, trying to keep things straight within the organization and across different teams themselves. And then finally, the hidden costs. And this is going to be something that we, again, speak to quite a bit, but this hidden cost of spreadsheets are not just taken into account of like the dollar spent on a spreadsheet versus a platform or a tool. They aren't free in the sense that there's an enormous amount of time and upkeep that's put towards maintaining these spreadsheets, tracking these down, updating them, and also the hidden cost that goes with the initiatives themselves that are not successful because there's not the level of collaboration and visibility into those given initiatives to ensure that they are successfully delivered on. 90% of senior executives share that they failed to deliver on their initiatives last year because of how initiatives themselves were implemented. Right from the get-go, we can have a great idea, but if the initiative itself is not built with a cohesive plan where individuals are aligned and share a unified view of what ultimately that initiative is yielding in terms of a successful outcome, they're doomed to fail. Time and time again, we just see this. And again, I know this is something our team has spent a lot of time thinking about, the hidden costs and the ROI here. Nathan, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on this, because I know you have spent a lot of time, even internally, advocating for the reason we need to continue to move away from spreadsheets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll call out just a few, Beck, Drew, Carrie, cannot count them all, infinite, thousands, like live in your world. And I don't love to hear it, but it's good to hear kind of, we're going through similar things as far as how many spreadsheets, how many versions or instances we have within our organization. And coming from someone that lives in Excel, lives in spreadsheets, going back to Brooks's framing of we're not anti-spreadsheet. Definitely I'm going to be using spreadsheets, going to be using Excel moving forward. We use them internally for forecasting, modeling, all of it. The problem then comes into where strategy is supposed to live, because that file or those files are quietly where that strategy just inherently, because spreadsheets are free, because they're easy to use, it makes it easy to use spreadsheets or Excel presentations as that living strategy system. And some of the costs that we kind of dig into here are one being a lot of time and capacity. So if we take a look at how our strategy, operations, finance team are spending their time, I think a lot of it, or there's probably a lot of consistency that people would be able to pull out. There was a study that said like a third of the week is actually analysis and decision support. The rest is just hunting data, cleaning it, rebuilding decks, spreadsheets, the next meeting. And I feel that, I live that internally. So just thinking through kind of if we have a 5-person team and 2/3 of their times are spent in spreadsheets, just prepping and reconciling all this information, you're kind of thinking through how much time is actually spent making the decisions needed to move the business forward, especially knowing just the level that a lot of these finance or strategy folks are within your organization, and spending their time more on prep and tactical things. So that's kind of one. I mentioned like the spreadsheets feel free. The people time around them absolutely does not. The second one is more of the error and trust. So this is where kind of the multiple sheets comes into it, the static versus dynamic. we all kind of treat the spreadsheet as the ground truth. But what we often see is, and what Brooks alluded to, is there's multiple versions floating throughout the organization. Finance has a sheet, RevOps has a sheet, there's a board sheet, and everybody kind of thinks of that as their own source of truth. And there's never really a definitive source of truth for the business. So there's a lot of different data points, a lot of numbers being thrown around. And I know folks have probably seen the data point of, 80 to 90% of complex spreadsheets have at least one formula mistake within them that actually deliberately changes how decisions are made or how that strategy is playing out. So when you're thinking about scenarios, things like that, that's fine. But when we think about a strategy story and a strategy problem specifically, the spreadsheet starts to leak into an area where we don't want it to leak into inevitably. And then the third and final thing that I'll just bring up is more of the decision lag. So the third cost that nobody really budgets for, and I think it's something that personally I haven't thought much into until really digging into some of these ROI metrics and things like that, is just the decision lag. So thinking through 60 to, I think the metric is 75% of strategic plans never land. It's not because the idea was bad, but because, we're making a lot of times these calls on stale or fragmented information, especially when strategy starts to live in spreadsheets. Every important decision or update metric, I know a lot of folks are probably pinging or slacking their colleagues to provide an update into the spreadsheet. And maybe it takes a few times. And then by the time that we can actually get an accurate update, it's been 3, 4, 5 weeks. And by that point, we've burned a lot of time a lot of valuable time that we could have been making decisions, and a lot of valuable time we could have been figuring out what are the risks within our strategy in our business as a whole. So with that said, kind of those are the 3 buckets that I'm thinking through, or that we think through internally. It's kind of that time and capacity, the error and trust, and then just the decision lag that spreadsheets inevitably have when you're running your strategy within it.
Yeah, I think especially like the decision lag, that is one of the most egregious hidden costs that we just see compound upon itself. And for organizations that, especially larger at size, when there's so many different layers already to making a decision, so many teams where it requires collaboration and communication, when we're adding to that time to decision based on looking at past historic or static data versus having something in real time giving us that visibility and surfacing signals, that's only going to add to that time. So frankly, the larger the organization, the greater the cost in a lot of these instances that we see. And so as we start to think about like shifting that idea from, hey, spreadsheets are a great place to start. It's a great place to just kind of get going, to establish a process, to maybe move out of a strategy living in folks' head. It now starts to move into, okay, well, how do we take an established foundation and really start to add fuel to the fire, to take a spark that gets us going in one direction with bringing our strategy into a view, and now all of a sudden say, how do we amplify that overall impact? And Sara, I know this is something you work with our customers on a lot to progress, because it is a journey from where we are today to what ultimately great looks like. And so would love to hear kind of this dynamic of where organizations typically are versus where they want to go.
Totally. I think one of the biggest unlocks for people is really thinking about the fact that they wouldn't run their sales operation, their customer support operation, or any other department on spreadsheets alone. They all have their own tools that they're using now that they've graduated past. Originally, they did run on spreadsheets, right? But they've all added tools and functionality that have far exceeded what they were able to do before on spreadsheets. And the fact that a lot of companies are still running the strategy part, arguably the most important part of the business, on a spreadsheet, is like this massive unlock of like how haven't we like supported this side of the business that matters the most of all yet in the same way. And I think where we're at today is where we're seeing people, we have a really nice like transition phase, because spreadsheets are super ingrained in businesses. So like we have said, we're not trying to replace them, but we're moving them to the back of the house. They're becoming that data connector point that is not where we're operating from. We have systems that give us a better visibility, a better job to act and be proactive, a single source of truth, which is so important so that we're not having any of these pitfalls that we're running into, potentially misreading or doing the wrong things. We have that data overload, so being able to really sift through the data and find the data that matters most and act upon that, and then being able to adapt and use AI to help us do all these things, to help us really be faster, more efficient, and more effective in all of our decision making. If we go to the next slide, I think this one is really starting to capture a lot of those benefits that we're seeing with connected systems. We mentioned efficiency through automated reporting, transparency, clear accountability of who owns what and who's updating and when, faster data-driven action. We're able to see context beyond the numbers. I think a big one from one of the customers that we've worked with, they were talking about they have so much data. They have access to thousands of spreadsheets, like we've heard in the comments. It's not a lack of data, but it's really applying the context to that data. We all know that data can tell 1,000 different stories too, but it's really being able to get access to that context and all of that historical context and being able to get that rich information out of it. That is really the part that allows us to make better decisions. And then another one that has come up for one of our customers that was super interesting, that's actually kind of pro spreadsheet, was they actually had found that all of their departments kind of set their spreadsheets up individually, and they all had different ways of formatting things, looking at things that all rolled up essentially to the same thing, but they actually didn't have to force their teams to change because of the way they could integrate with spreadsheets. They could all keep doing things their own way, but then by the way they connected with Elate, it allowed them to still get to that same point of unified data and not having to do the change management of forcing a team to function differently out of the gate. All that to say, I think where our customers have had the most unlock is getting kind of to that phase 3 point, where ultimately at the end of the day, it is better if we can directly connect to those sources of truth themselves, those action like CRMs or things that are doing the action. And so we have to ask the teams to do less updates. The more we can eliminate the manual input of information, we can automate things in real time, the faster we can be, the less intrusive it is on our teams. That's kind of best case scenario. And we've had a customer that has been with us for 3 years that has made that progression with us. They really did start with the spreadsheet side of things. And now their goal in this past year was, okay, how do we start to eliminate some of these and do more of these direct connections? I think one more point I'd say on the positive for spreadsheets is as we think about that progression, there is a cost analysis that comes into that. And spreadsheets are typically a cheap way to do an integration if that's not available for you, if you're not wanting to pay for those direct API links. It's a cheap kind of stepping stone to get you there, where ultimately that might be where you want to go, but it just might not be in the cards for today. I think it does give us that flexibility. And thankfully, I think with Elate, that's a really nice thing that our customers see that they can get in and work with the systems they have quickly, but then still be able to plan for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the other things that we see a lot is, again, while spreadsheets are a good starting off point, and they're simple, they're intuitive, there's not a lot of structure and or I'll say rules in a healthy way. I know a lot of people hear rules and they think negative context, but like there are certain patterns within an organization that spreadsheets are not going to capture and ensure those patterns are being put in place during the process of building a strategy itself. A lot of times we'll hear, can we use Elate? Can we use a solution? Can we use AI to identify overcapacity teams or individuals that have too many objectives, or frankly, like objectives that are built for failure from the onset? And again, a spreadsheet is not going to capture those. Can someone manually go through a spreadsheet and look for how many objectives or how much does a team have or an individual have, or are we projecting an increase in revenue for the coming quarter that's way outside of the bands of expectations based on previous performance? Absolutely. But not only do you have to know what questions to ask when you're trying to identify that type of information in a spreadsheet, you then are at the mercy of being able to sift through all of the other noise to identify those signals appropriately. And again, when we think about AI, that is what opinionated AI is designed to do. It is designed to surface those risks and pressure points because it is seeing those patterns and recognize those across thousands of other strategies, specific industries, verticals. And that's what we're building in as a thought partner to our process of building a plan and executing on it when we are leveraging AI, is we're building in those fail safes, right? When we can start to identify in real time when an individual is building an objective that frankly is not successful from the onset. Like we know the likelihood of this being carried through to fruition is very low. We want to identify that and catch it before our plan rolls into place because it provides the inevitability of us having to sunset that objective itself. So again, think of the AI aspect of this as a thought partner versus a spreadsheet, which is good as just a capturing what we want done. But for most organizations at this point, they know that they need to complement the human aspect of this within technology to really bring both to the forefront because there's just so much automation that AI is building into this process for catching those things, both in the planning process, but also as it's being executed upon.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So as we think about really the aspect of where do spreadsheets fit in, as we've shared throughout this, we don't believe that spreadsheets need to be killed off entirely. There is a time and a place. And as Sarah was alluding to, oftentimes what can happen within an organization, especially as they're on this journey or this progression to bringing their strategy from a spreadsheet into an AI platform that's helping to facilitate it, is they might even want to start connecting certain spreadsheets to that data system, to that AI source, so that we can start to really decipher what information do we need to be looking at or identifying. So one of the things we are huge advocates of here at Elate is the ability to integrate spreadsheets for a time and a place. And so what we've done is we've actually walked through an example and that Nathan has built to kind of show how is it that we see the breaking that starts to occur within a spreadsheet when it's being used to run a strategy versus when a spreadsheet is used for the purpose of just connecting data sources or connecting teams and bringing a shared view together. So Nathan, I'll go ahead and let you share your screen here to dive in further.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just the preface here, this is a very kind of basic, simplified version of what a lot of our spreadsheets probably look like. So if we get a little lay of the land here, we're starting. Blueprint Industries is our organization here. This is the top line model. So you're thinking through how we're planning, ACV, conversion rates, coverage, all the math that we go back and forth with quarter to quarter. If you're sitting in strategy ops, finance, this probably looks like half your week. And honestly, this is where Excel and Sheets are still the right tool a lot of times because of the modeling, because of the equations themselves. And we know that a lot of these sheets themselves are still going to exist and be out there. Where this, this starts to leak into more of the strategy side of it is when we start to break down kind of the strategic initiatives specifically. So this is about column J here is where we start pushing spreadsheets maybe a little bit past their comfort zones here. We have the initiatives, the owners, themes, statuses, all kind of in the same grid, the same model, the same sheet as the financial model itself. One day this can feel organized. By month 2, someone's made a copy of this. Sales has a version, marketing has a version. You can see some of the updates are outdated, a few weeks to a month outdated here. This is exactly kind of where those hidden costs show up there. The initiative list drifts from what people are actually doing. The statuses live in the comments, emails, Slack threads that folks may never see, and all the work of getting ready for review happens kind of around the sheet and not in it specifically. So for us, the question wasn't, again, how we get rid of spreadsheets. It was how do we keep using this for modeling, but let something else handle the strategy, ownership, and risk part of it. So that's kind of where we'll hop over to more of the Elate instance and show you more in depth of what that looks like specifically. So just to get kind of a lay of the land of Elate itself, you can see we're still in Blueprint Industries here. This is the strategy home that lives in Elate for Blueprint Industries. Think of this as kind of the front page of the operating plan specifically. We can see we have our operating outcomes up top that we really care about: net new revenue, our new logos, expansion revenue, NRR. Under that, you can see the three key themes that Blueprint Industries cares about, with growing our core market, deepening our strategic accounts, and running a lean go-to-market engine. And on the right, you can see kind of our mission, vision, and values. Not as wall art, but as the context every objective has to map into. So instead of kind of the 20 spreadsheets, the 10 slide decks, this is kind of that first place, or the one place that we go to and we can point to and say, this is the plan, and this is how we're scoring ourselves against it. So digging in a little bit deeper into more of a company view, if I switch to hierarchy here, you can start to see how we could actually cascade this down. So we have our operating outcomes at the top still here. If we click into one of our themes, let's click into grow our core markets. You can see the specific objectives that tie directly into that theme. And if we want to continue cascading those down, we can see the teams associated to that. We get a really easy view of, is this on pace, at risk, or behind? We can see any other child objectives that are continuing to cascade down this. So instead of kind of the inevitable 18 to 40 tab master plan that we have that kind of goes through all of these cascades and things like that, we kind of get a one view of the cascade version of our strategy in general. So we'll dig into a little bit here, going into a specific objective or a specific team. So let's click into our sales team here. So right now we have two objectives: close mid-market manufacturing new logos, improve core market win rates, and deal quality. Let's click into our close mid-market manufacturing new logos. And this is kind of where we zoom into that specific objective. And this is where things really start to break down and get real into the insights of what's happening within this objective specifically. So we can see at a really high level view, our goal for the year is about $400,000. We're at a 305 with 2 or 3 weeks to go. And we are quite behind on our new logos closed. Knowing that our fiscal year ends December 31st, this objective is marked as behind. So where this kind of starts to tie into, you probably noticed these little Google Sheet connections here. Where this starts to tie in is when we are using Google Sheets. And again, internally, we would recommend utilizing like a CRM or a direct integration to a data source that you are keeping live. But if we want to integrate into a Google Sheet where we have somebody going to update specific metrics, all we have to do is for this specific new ARR for manufacturing, we can see right now that currently for Q4, we're at 75K to our goal of 100K. Let's say we just got a new business deal from a new manufacturing organization. Really easily, we can go into our Elate connected outcomes, find the specific outcome that we want to change. So it's Q4, the 75K here. We just quickly update. That was a $10,000 deal. We go back into Elate, and immediately it refreshes with the information, $85,000, that we're having folks go in when we're using spreadsheets and updating those accordingly. So very easily it becomes, one version of what we are updating. We have probably a RevOps team or a finance team in the background updating a lot of these things. And very quickly, this becomes the one version that then pulls directly and ties directly to the specific objectives, to the specific outcomes themselves. And becomes a little bit more of that one version versus 15 or 20 different versions leading the way here.
Yeah, Nathan, I think one thing that we've noticed internally as well as with customers is when we have this real-time view across multiple spreadsheets, what we would push towards in a lot of instances, connecting directly into data sources, is greater accountability. When folks know that the information they're providing or being asked to provide is being brought into a centralized view that leadership is leveraging on a regular basis to drive decisions and, more importantly, intervention. One thing you didn't mention, Nathan, that I think is always really critical is we can look at a spreadsheet and look at the status, look at commentary, but if that status and commentary is starting to point towards other objectives that don't live on that spreadsheet, immediately it falls apart. Or that's where all of the time and the energy of folks needing to go, okay, well, let's go set up a meeting with XYZ. And now we need to get an update on these objectives themselves. We want to, again, bring together that unified view where we can see kind of the waterfall from objectives and how they all are connected, really in identifying a root cause quickly.
Absolutely. Great point. And going into even a little bit more deeper into that is just the ability to, as well as we think about specifically strategy advisor and how AI starts to play into your strategic plan within Elate. We have the ability to, tie things to parent and child, which is what we showed in the hierarchy view, adding the context where necessary for specific updates. But when we think about, if we are trying to go into our objective specifically and really understand what's going on here without needing to dig into every context within the objectives, without needing to dig into everything at once, this is where that strategy layer starts to live on top of the strategic plan and can read into the different objectives, the different tactics, the different updates, and the different metrics themselves. And you can start to pull out some of the different recommendations here. So if we clear the history there, and then we go into strategy advisor for this specific new logos objective that's behind, and we click summarize or advisor recommendations. Let's go with the recommendations here. We can really easily start to pull out and understand a little bit more into what is going on within this objective specifically. So it's at high risk, understanding the different objectives that are tying into it and pulling the commentary from those objectives specifically and the different insights themselves, and be able to fully put together the picture of it's not just this objective, it's a full living, breathing strategy. It's really helpful, specifically in my role, as we think about not having to go dig into every objective for everything, or not having to go, ask for specific subjective commentary that might not be there. Instead, this AI, this strategy advisor itself, lives on top of our plan, and we can really dig into it a little bit more there. Where this also lives in the platform is under our risk navigator section here. So this is where we can really easily toggle any of our starred or important objectives throughout the organization. We will start to get more proactive risk analysis happening in the background with all of our objectives. So we can see really quickly here, this was the closed mid-market manufacturing new logos. This is our operating outcome here. If we wanted to click learn more, we would go into more of a risk summary, understanding all of the objective relationships and why specifically our AI strategy advisor is giving the recommendations to the analysis that it is, and really digging in here. So it's a really easy way that we can kind of have that one strategy layer sitting on top without having to go from objective to objective and try to gather all the information manually. We're getting that proactively from strategy advisor.
Yeah, I think to your point, Nathan, it's identifying and being able to, in real time, ask questions that gives us answers to what's the root cause, what's tracking or driving an objective or an outcome towards being off track or at risk. But it's also having AI surfacing those areas that we might not be thinking to ask about, right? And this is where Risk Navigator identifies, again, those pressure points within the plan and how it's being tracked or executed against, because If we are only at the mercy of knowing what questions to ask or what prompts to make, we're gonna miss a lot of the things that do require our intervention sooner than later. So all of this information also can be facilitated and pulled into Reporting Assistant to auto-generate these reports, create these summaries, and pull them in to be shared with the leadership team themselves. But again, bringing together a foundation where we have a unified view across the organization is really important to then having an AI layer that's going to be powerful in identifying the right things within our strategy.
Yeah. And one additional thing I'll add on to that, just thinking about internal use cases of how we are kind of going about this, thinking through like the leadership team meetings, executive team meetings that we have where, before a lot of this, it was, okay, whose deck are we using? Whose sheet are we using? Whose information is correct? And instead now it's really easy to walk into those leadership conversations and say, here are the 2 or 3 objectives that are putting our plan at risk right now. Understanding who owns them, what are we doing, what do we need to do with them, and what can we change to move it in the right direction has been incredibly powerful just as an internal kind of use case as well. So one thing I just wanted to call out shortly there.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add to that too, Nathan, is also having access to every sheet that is in use that rolls up to that as well. That's connected in there. And so you know which one it is instead of having to then go down to those next level leaders and ask for that information.
Totally. Yeah. So kind of to pull the full thread together here, as we mentioned, spreadsheets are still strong for the modeling, the math. We push, strategy ownership and tactics and objectives specifically just into the Elate platform, which then allows the AI strategy advisor on top of it, on top of the structure, not just the file itself. So it can help and with a lot of those internal meetings, help us surface that risk, help us prioritize what really matters heading into meetings, heading into leadership reviews, heading into board meetings, those types of things. And that's the pattern that we use internally. It's the pattern that, as Sarah's alluded to, we use with our customers. But Brooks, I'll kick it back to you if you want to talk about how teams are usually getting started with this without kind of imploding their entire planning process in general, I guess.
Yeah. And so I think, again, as we think about the idea for where Risk Navigator comes into play, where Elate helps to create that unified view, we very much believe that it is crawl, walk, run. And when we get back to ultimately the takeaways from today, what we want to allow for is, let me steal back the screen share from you there, Nathan. Perfect. What we want to allow for is the idea that spreadsheets are great at creating kind of the starting point, but they aren't designed to fully run our strategy itself. Not only that, but if we're putting together a tool that wasn't purpose-built for running our strategy, for building it, for ensuring alignment and collaboration, not only do we have the wrong foundation to begin with, but that foundation isn't going to allow for AI to serve as a layer over the top of the entirety of our plan to help serve as a thought partner. And that is ultimately where, again, a lot of the chasm is being created between the organizations that are thinking of strategic planning as a competitive advantage versus those that are more so just checking the box saying, yes, we did it. Here it is. Here's our annual plan. Maybe we'll revisit it once a quarter versus saying, no, this is something living and breathing that we are frankly scrutinizing monthly to understand, like, where do we persist and where do we pivot within those initiatives and those bets that we're making, the most expensive, highest bets that we are putting in place through the organization. We need to have a thought partner continuously scrutinizing and helping us to evaluate what's working and what's not. And then the third piece of this is connecting data with execution. We've touched on this. I saw there was a question around like integration to Workday. And yes, while we do have the ability to integrate into a spreadsheet, we do ultimately want to drive towards connection into those data sources where teams are operating out of. Sarah mentioned this at the onset. I don't know that a lot of teams, especially on the sales and the marketing and the finance, product and engineering, are relying on spreadsheets for the entirety of how they do their work. They are typically leveraging a solution like a Workday, Jira, Salesforce, even a smart sheet, in some examples, elevating the standard Excel spreadsheet or Google sheet to ultimately like become more effective in how they think about their role and the way in which they go about their work. The same is being done by strategy and operations leaders now. They need a total view of the organization, the plan that's being put in place, the execution against that plan itself, and ultimately how AI is going to serve in allowing them to automate a lot of the mundane work that they're spending their time on now, consolidating reports, bringing together updates across a lot of different sources, trying to track down like and identify root causes for why their plans might be going at risk. And so these are the things we want to keep in mind. Again, spreadsheets can serve their purpose as a starting point, but ultimately we want to think about how do we continue to elevate this. So that's the high level of kind of the takeaways from today. We'll open it up. I know we've already got a few questions here. I answered one of, yes, we do have those integrations. Always, you can get a full list of integrations from our website itself. Another question we have is, so can we just connect spreadsheet to ChatGPT/Gemini? And I'm sure we've all three got opinions on this, but let me start with this. Yes, you can start by just simply connecting a spreadsheet to Gemini or ChatGPT, and it's going to be able to, frankly, like interrogate that spreadsheet and provide you with answers to questions that you know to be asking. The challenge is not only does it have to be connected to all of the spreadsheets being used across the organization to track the strategy itself, but you have to be pretty darn sure that there aren't those spreadsheets that are living in the shadows, or frankly, like knowing what questions to be asking. And then even once you have the answers to the questions themselves, you then have to take those out and communicate, collaborate, set up time to dive into what resolution is needed, what risk is being present or provided within the strategy itself, which again is where an opinionated LLM designed for strategy and operations leaders to already look for certain things like overcapacity teams, number of objectives for individuals across those different departments. All of those areas of risk that we're building into kind of the thought process helps to surface the questions that we aren't thinking of asking versus, again, just connecting a spreadsheet to ChatGPT or Gemini or something of the like. But Nathan, Sarah, would love to hear if you've got any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think at a high level, when I'm thinking about just internally, ChatGPT, I think there's a distinction between more of the objective type data and things like that that we can go and put into a Copilot or a ChatGPT. But then there's also the living, breathing strategy with subjective narrative that, no matter what kind of AI that you're using, if you don't have that strategy in a system that is living and breathing, and like in Elate or just outside of a spreadsheet in general, I think there's a lot that can be lost in translation between some of the prompts and things like that versus what we are, we have with Elate, with the living strategy system and AI sitting on top of the system itself.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. I think the thing I would add to it is the coaching component. A lot of the people that we work with think about some of their leaders maybe aren't as experienced as others. They've got people that they're kind of new to leadership, that they're training to think strategically. And I think it goes to that point you were making, Brooks, about knowing what questions to ask. And what you'll get from a system that you won't get from a tool is being pushed the right stuff, being coached in the right way, surfacing things and asking you questions versus expecting them to know what to look for and then to go do it. I think just giving them access to like a ChatGPT or a Gemini or something like that doesn't ensure that it's getting used and being used well, whereas a tool is there to help serve that purpose.
Yeah, spot on. And I saw another question around security. And yeah, that is a top of mind area of focus for Elate and has been from the onset. We've stored the strategic plans of Fortune 100 organizations to professional sports teams and a lot of organizations or industries, I should say, in between. Security is top of mind, and our ability to ensure that, frankly, that data is secure, but also not being accessed in a competitive way across different organizations is very top of mind and something that we've built in within our infrastructure and architecture itself, to ensure that there is a confidence and a level of trust in the strategies that are being hosted within Elate. Similarly, well, not similarly, but a follow-up question to that was, any advice for getting hardened resistors, CFOs that only have ever used Excel, to adopt new tools? And I think a lot of times when it comes to getting folks to let go of spreadsheets, certainly there's an ROI conversation of time savings, but I think that in and of itself is just simply table stakes for introducing new software. And while there's an enormous amount of time savings, I think internally we have an ROI calculator I referenced, that Nathan is very intimate and familiar with, where, if we can condense the amount of time by 30% across the organization, capturing updates, tracking down information through these different spreadsheets and tools and emails and collaborating and setting one-off meetings, then, a third of time that's going to be allocated towards your executive team, who are likely your most expensive resources, that adds up really quickly. That being said, there's always the pushback of change management. And hey, I get that, but also my teams don't necessarily want a new software tool to implement. How much time is this going to take? And that's really where the other part of this use case or business case starts to come in the form of how many strategic initiatives are not successfully delivered within an organization today because of a lack of visibility, a lack of alignment, or a lack of proactivity in helping to remove hurdles or obstacles that are preventing folks from being successful. Across the entire Elate platform, we see 80% plus of objectives successfully delivered. That being said, the majority of companies that are coming to us, we see are somewhere between 30 to 40% of objectives failing to be successfully delivered today across those companies. And so if we can say very conservatively, we're going to have an impact on 15 to 20% of those failed objectives coming to fruition. Again, those are some of the biggest bets that we are making. And we can see quite a range of what is that initiative worth within an organization. But if you just take a rough estimate of each initiative is worth $100,000, that starts to add up really quickly of now those initiatives being successfully delivered on. So I think there's a time savings argument, but there's also a business impact of moving failed objectives to successfully delivered on.
I think one thing I would add there too, from things that we hear from our customers, is we hear a lot about the theme of preparing for succession planning and moving into that next generation as well. And when we think about new, younger leaders coming up, there's a lot of resistance from that interface of updating in Excel. They hate it. They think there's got to be a better way. They're used to being served a better user experience and tools in the way that they approach their work. So I think there is an expectation for that to be better. And so I think just we're seeing that trend a lot with a lot of leaders of preparing for that kind of next way of doing things. And I think back to comparing it to when businesses ran on ledgers, like pen and paper, there was a big moment where it shifted. And I think we are kind of in another moment like that, where we're just shifting the way that we do business. And eventually there are going to be changes that just kind of have to happen.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, I think the last thing here, just thinking through the ROI stuff, a lot of anecdotes come to mind just as we think about kind of how we're thinking through, arming our team specifically on how to talk through these things. One thing that we've seen from a lot of organizations that we've worked with are just a lot of consistency around, specifically on average, people have, or organizations have, around 30 leaders and planning and reviews, and across the year that itself, spending thousands of hours in prep, status updates, manual reporting, thinking through, as we think through a fully loaded type of leadership time and the cost to that. We're looking at hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on average, that are, once we think about tightening up the process, it by, a 10 to 15% margin there, when you are moving out of spreadsheet workflows and things like that, you're freeing up a lot of senior leadership time, a lot of dollars, leadership capacity to do other things and other turn to other decisions and important decisions within the business itself. So just wanted to kind of share a little bit of an anecdote of some of the common things we're hearing around a lot of the businesses we're working with, and just taking not only just the labor costs themselves, but the initiatives, and how we're doing those too. So just wanted to add that too.
Yeah. Great questions. And we're right up against the hour, and we cannot thank everyone enough for taking the time here today to join us. And as we shared from the onset, this is a topic that is near and dear to a lot of team members' hearts here at Elate, because as former strategy and operations leaders, we spent more than our fair share of time in spreadsheets themselves. And so as we think about the future and how strategy and operations leaders optimize the way they build, execute, and report on their strategies themselves, ultimately it comes down to ensuring that they are leveraging AI as a thought partner versus leveraging spreadsheets in the entirety of not just building the plan, but execution upon it. So we appreciate, again, everyone's time. This recording will be shared out, but if you do have any questions for any of us here directly, you see our emails on the screen. But thank you all for the time, and looking forward to connecting soon.